So, Lwandle is what I want to discuss in closing points here. Before I know we're going to have one last session, but Lwandle is what I want to discuss in closing the course formally. So, the Lwandle people were evicted by an interdict of a court, right? Now the Constitution says people shouldn't be evicted without due process and so on. Their lawyers messed up the case very badly, right? It was Siskona's lawyers, they messed up the case very badly if you read their case. But that's not the point I want to make. I want to make a different point. There is a language that is used for people who live in informal settlements. And what do they call those people? Illegal occupiers?
Yeah.
What's the other word?
Temporal.
Squatters, occupiers, illegal. Illegal is always in it, somewhere, right? So the question is, I'm one of those people who believe that as long as the law is just and the society is just, you obey the law. We're now 20 years down the line, and the desperation of people coming to the city, and we know how many people are going to come into the city. You can literally predict there's going to be 50,000 people moving into Cape Town, and then we have population growth. So then you can say, okay, this is the amount of people, right? Now, the question is, politics is in everything. And if you look at land in South Africa, people are fighting, mainly think about rural land. But the real land struggle is about urban land. And the real urban land struggle is about land inside the city. And it's not spoken about. It really is not spoken about. So, if you go out, you remember when we went to picnic in Rondebosch,
Yeah.
right? And you see a house that can be on a plot the size of this entire building and a house in the middle, right? But you can see how many floors are on if you build a building on it, right? It doesn't mean you shouldn't have green and a yard and garden and stuff like that. What I'm trying to say to you is that there is so much land in suburban areas and close to the city that we're not talking about. And all we do is we listen to courts saying to people who are desperate to have a roof over their heads, you're illegal, you can't live here, but maybe the city has to give you a shack to live in somewhere. And we have to get out of the mindset, that the shack is permanent. We have to get into a mindset that there has to be a radical re-altering of land. And that might mean that organizations such as ours have to sometimes not obey court orders. Right? It might mean that. And I think it is going to mean that in sometimes. Not because I don't believe that courts are important and should not enforce the law. The courts are enforcing the law narrowly. But behind the courts are all the people with power. And they influencing the decision of the court. And the discussion of councillors here is a vital one. Because the councillor for Khayelitsha thinks, oh, my piece of land is RR, I must look at after RR. That's nonsense.
Let's forget about BM.
Right? He should say, okay, what is the best way to house people? If it's in RR, what do we do in RR? If it is that there's land elsewhere because in RR there's going to be floods, we have to find different land. That has to be raised in the council. It doesn't happen for three reasons. One, because of the economic power of people with land. They pay rates to the city, they have income, etc., etc. So the city doesn't want to offend them. The ANC doesn't want to offend them, the DA doesn't want to offend them. And later the EFF won't want to offend them. Right? Because the EFF's vote comes from many black middle class people. And they don't want squatters next to their houses either. right? So the important thing to remember here is the first obstacle that we face, people with enormous economic resources. The second obstacle that we face is that our communities think that things are like this and they will stay like this. So the only way that people know how to express anger is just take a petrol bomb. That's the only way to do it.
And the stones.
And stones. And then we go back tomorrow, we back in the shack. Right? And that results from an absence of knowledge at community level. An absence of knowledge of what we can do. And the last is the elected leaders of our councils and so on don't have the knowledge either. It's either kept away from them, they don't seek it, and they leave it out. Now, courts would be very different. You imagine if there was a genuine debate in the city council saying, in the city here, and this is a fact, we're going to talk about it in the SJC very soon, in the city here, there's a piece of land, 47 square meters, 47,000 square meters, which the city is going to, not the city, the province is going to sell off to private land developers. Right? The province is selling off land just down the road here. 47,000 square meters to private developers. I don't know how many people you can fit into there. But I believe that what we should be struggling for is not only against land evictions, that's fine. What we should be struggling for is positive change. And that positive change means that 70% of that land, that development, should be made available to the poorest and to working people. Should be made available. Subsidized, etc., etc. So that requires a genuine struggle. And for me, the basis of that struggle is the Constitution. And there are two areas in the Constitution which is important for me, or several, but one is about dignity and equality and so on, those nice words. But there are two other important parts in the Constitution. The one is the property clause. And that's a very good clause. People don't realize how good it is. It's just that people don't understand how you can use it. It says that you may expropriate or, what's the other word? Deprive people of property. But you have to do so justly and with appropriate compensation. And by a law. You can't just go and take it. We can't just walk in and say, this is my property, because otherwise he will go into his house and she will go into his house and then there's chaos. So there must be a law that says. So the question is, we need to campaign for a law that makes property accessible to people. So the Constitution gives you the right to expropriate and the right of deprivation with compensation. And in certain instances you don't have to, and the Constitution uses the word just and equitable. Just and equitable. Now for someone who's very rich, just means a lot of money. For us, just means for people who don't have a lot of money. Right? So the question is, how do you make the voice of people who don't have a lot of money the voice that the courts enforce in explaining just and equitable? The government can do it easily, but the government is afraid of the markets, the government is afraid of very rich people, and the government has its leaders who have their own interest. But we cannot deal with Lwandle. It's a terrible symptom of a big problem. We must deal with it, we help the people there, and so on. But there has to be an understanding. And this doesn't mean shouting the slogan, Israelite. It doesn't mean that. That's nonsense. Right? What it means is going to study what land is available. first and most important is what state land is available. Right? The second question we have to do is look at ways in which we can bring an understanding of which parts of the urban landscape, along Main Road, along Voortrekker Road, along Klipfontein Road, we can bring all our people from Manenberg and from Khayelitsha closer to the city, closer to opportunity, closer to better schools, closer to easier to police places. And so if Mandela and them struggle was about political freedom for us, that political freedom allows us to struggle better, to struggle easier, to have an easier way to struggle for land. Because today, me making this speech 10 years ago, been almost very difficult. But in the coming elections and stuff like that, we have the opportunity to raise the voice of that. But much more than elections and much more than courts is going to be how we educate ourselves and how we create a movement. Because the courts didn't bring freedom. It's the struggle of people. And the courts was one small tool in it. One small tool.